Now, we've been talking about the latest events coming out of Saudi Arabia, protesters and perhaps shots being fired at those protesters. That all adds to concerns about the world's oil supplies. Now, don't forget that food prices also have been rising. They are at record highs, and demand for food-related commodities continues to rise not only from people who consume them, but also from investors that speculate. Now, we put together a taking stock think tank to explore what could become a global crisis in food and energy. Carl Larry is the president of Oil Outlooks and Opinions. John Stephenson is a portfolio manager at First Investment Management. He is also the author of The Little Book of Commodity Investing. And via telephone, Rutgers history professor Toby Jones. He is the author of the book Desert Kingdom: How Oil and Water Forged Modern Saudi Arabia. Gentlemen, good to have you with us on Taking Stock. Carl, I want to begin with you and find out the effects on oil prices didn't seem to be that exaggerated today when you compare the events in Saudi Arabia and the actual price. The price of oil closed down. Is this because everybody's kind of used to the problems that exist in the Middle East? They go, more rioting, more protests. Yeah, we know that. Oil's at $101, $103 a barrel. And they go, all right, we don't worry about it.
Well, I think, we had some events today that kind of, helped the price go down a little bit. We had China come out with a trade deficit that was pretty big, and that really took a lot of the air out of the market. I think when you look at oil and commodities in general, that we're talking about a lot of Asian growth, and that's built up into it. So seeing them come off.
That's the big macro story.
That's the big macro story. And then also the ratings cut in Spain, that played a little bit part too. Again, that Middle Eastern oil, goes
rise in the dollar, fall in the euro.
Exactly. So we're seeing a lot of that weigh on the market right now. I think until we see what happens tomorrow, when they actually have these protests, full blown, we're going to kind of wait and see what happens there.
John Stephenson, come in on this topic of the effects of oil, this effect on oil prices by these news headlines. Is it because people are just inured to it? They're used to it by now?
Well, I would agree with all the things the previous presenter made as points, but I'd add another one. High oil prices in themselves cause economic slowdown. So I think it's sort of a combination. And now the market is focused on what could go wrong with the global growth story, and high oil prices are part of that.
Toby Jones, now I want to get your thoughts on, what could go wrong in Saudi Arabia, beginning with tomorrow?
Well, tomorrow there is a scheduled, what some Saudis are calling a day of rage, which is supposed to be a national series of protests on the order of what's happened elsewhere in the region, from Egypt to Bahrain and Yemen. But things got started a little bit earlier over the last week. Some Shiis in the eastern province, which also happens to be where all of Saudi Arabia's oil is, have been staging regular demonstrations, and they were fired on today by Saudi security, sustaining some casualties. So it looks like things are getting started early, and what's unknown at this point is whether the Saudi security response will actually lead to greater mobilization.
Toby Jones, based on your researches and your studies of what happens in Saudi Arabia, has the regime ever been challenged like this before?
Yeah, it's certainly seen challenges to its authority before. I mean, it hasn't been for a long time. And most recently, after Desert Storm in 1991, when there was some domestic dissent and challenges to its power. But really, it was in the eastern province about 35 years ago, in the late 70s, actually, in which Shiites took to the streets in large numbers. And this has there are certain echoes at play here, with Shiites calling for social justice and political rights. What's uncertain at this point is what happens there will spread or have an effect elsewhere in Riyadh, in Jeddah, Mecca, Medina. Will this actually spark a national moment?
Carl, it looks like we're going to be learning the names of a lot of new cities in Saudi Arabia. Do you think that the oil speculators, while they watch these scenes of unrest in places such as Saudi Arabia, are filling offshore tankers, filling ships full of crude, thinking the price has only got to go higher? What are you seeing there?
I think so. I think we're seeing that right now from a lot of companies, is that the idea is that credit's still tight. And, in a sense, what they're doing is they're taking oil and banking that away as an asset. So whether they put it in storage because of the risk coming forward or just plain growth, if we can continue that way, it's a bankable asset for them right now. So they're going to keep putting it away. We'll see more floating storage, and onshore storage where we can.
John Stephenson, bring the U.S. dollar into this discussion. Does the dollar get stronger as oil gets weaker now?
Well, I think the dollar will get stronger as oil gets weaker, but I think ultimately in the longer term, oil will get stronger because I think what we're setting up for is a real challenge to Saudi Arabia's stated capacity, incremental capacity of 3.5 to 4 million barrels a day, which I personally don't believe they have. And if, in fact, it does get challenged, you'll see regime change or something close to it at some point down the road, and that will mean a spike in oil.
Are you surprised, John Stephenson, at the muted response, at least right now, from the United States about events in Saudi Arabia?
Well, I am surprised, but I think the reality is we've got our hands full in several other countries in the region, and I think we just want to stay on the sidelines, let them sort things out in the Middle East themselves before we react in any way, either in terms of our verbal statements or getting involved militarily.